Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're zeroing in on a pretty significant recent appointment.
That's right. Jeanine Pirro becoming the interim U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. It's definitely generated some buzz.
For sure. And to help us and you unpack this, we've looked at quite a few sources.
Yeah, a real mix. We've got news coverage from places like Straight Arrow News, PBS NewsHour, the New York Times, so different viewpoints there.
We also pulled up her Wikipedia page, naturally, for the biography basics. Even checked out her TikTok, interestingly enough.
Right, and balanced that with official info from the Department of Justice itself, plus Wikipedia entries on the specific U.S. Attorney's offices involved D.C., and for comparison, the Western District of Texas.
So our mission here, for you listening, is pretty straightforward. We want to cut through some of the noise, understand why this appointment matters, get a handle on Pirro's background.
And really grasp what makes this particular U.S. Attorney role, the one in D.C., so unique. We're aiming for clarity, focusing on the facts and the context, not getting bogged down in, taking sides.
Exactly. Okay, so let's start with the basics. The announcement, it was Thursday, May 8th, 2025.
Correct. President Donald Trump announced it, naming Jeanine Pirro as the interim United States Attorney for the District of Columbia.
And she's stepping into a role that wasn't actually empty, right? She's replacing Ed Martin.
Yeah, Martin was also serving on an interim basis. And his next steps are, well, they're pretty interesting, too. He's not just leaving, he's shifting within the DOJ.
Right, taking on multiple roles. Director of the Weaponization Working Group.
Also Associate Deputy Attorney General and Pardoned Attorney. It's quite a portfolio.
And the context we have suggests this move for Martin happened because there was political pushback, specifically from Senate Republicans, regarding his potential permanent appointment.
That seems to be the case, making a permanent confirmation look unlikely for him.
And Trump himself weighed in on Pirro's appointment, didn't he? On Truth Social.
He did, called her a powerful crusader for victims of crime. He also mentioned her work establishing the first domestic violence bureau in a prosecutor's office.
Praised her quite highly, said she's excelled in all ways.
That's the quote. But it's really important for you to remember, this is an interim appointment for Pirro.
Good point. So for her to get the job permanently, she'd still need to go through the Senate confirmation process.
Exactly. That whole political dimension is still very much in play down the road.
Okay, so let's talk about Jeanine Pirro herself, who is the person taking on this major role. She was born June 2nd, 1951.
Right. And her career, it's not just law. It's really a mix of law, media, and politics, primarily based in New York State.
She had some significant firsts there, didn't she? First woman elected as a Westchester County Court Judge back in 1990.
Yep. And then first woman elected Westchester County DA in 93. She held that DA post for quite a while, got reelected twice in 97 and 2001.
And as DA, she really carved out a reputation, particularly around certain types of cases.
Definitely. Domestic abuse cases, crimes against the elderly that became her focus. One source even noted she was an aggressive bureau chief for the Domestic Violence and Child Abuse Bureau.
And had that policy, I read, about not dropping domestic violence cases just because the victim asked, due to potential coercion.
Right. That was a notable stance. Though, interestingly, another point raised in the sources is that while she was recognized for that work, there was some commentary, maybe criticism, about the number of major public corruption or organized crime prosecutions during her tenure. Just adds a bit more texture to her record as DA.
Okay. So beyond prosecuting, she also dipped her toes into electoral politics several times.
She did. A run for lieutenant governor nomination in '86, which she withdrew from. Then that 2006 Senate bid against Hillary Clinton.
Which she also dropped out of eventually.
Right. Before pivoting to run for New York Attorney General that same year, 2006, she lost that race to Andrew Cuomo.
So these campaigns, even the unsuccessful ones, they kind of show her ambition and her political alignment over the years?
They definitely paint a picture of her trying to move up within the Republican Party structure in New York at the time.
And then, of course, there's the career path. Many people probably know her best from media.
Absolutely. Huge presence there. First with Judge Jeanine Pirro on the CW. That was 2008 to 2011.
And then the big one, Justice with Judge Jeanine on Fox News, ran for a very long time.
Yeah, 2011, right up until, May 2025 when she left for this DOJ role. And she was also co-hosting The Five since 2022. Left that too.
So a major media figure. She's written books too.
6 of them, including one from 2018 titled Liars, Leakers, and Liberals, The Case Against the Anti-Trump Conspiracy.
Okay, that title certainly signals her political stance pretty clearly in recent years.
No ambiguity there. And speaking of recent controversies, we should probably mention the Smartmatic defamation lawsuit.
Ah, yes, related to the 2020 election claims about voting machines.
Exactly. And Fox News, her employer at the time, settled a similar, very high-profile lawsuit with Dominion Voting Systems. It's part of the recent context.
It really raises questions, doesn't it? When someone moves from that kind of media role with those kinds of controversies into a position demanding legal impartiality.
It's definitely a point of discussion. The sources also clearly state she's been a longtime ally of Donald Trump.
And he pardoned her ex-husband, Albert Pirro, back in 2021.
Correct. Which makes her earlier political positions back during that 2006 Senate run quite interesting in contrast.
How so?
Well, she described herself then as red on fiscal policy, but having broad blue stripes when it comes to social issues.
Really? Like what specifically?
At that time, 2005, 2006, she stated support for a woman's right to an abortion, supported civil unions for same-sex couples, and backed a New York hate crimes law that included sexual orientation.
That's quite different from the tone of her commentary more recently on Fox News, for example.
It is. It highlights how political stances can evolve, or perhaps how they're presented, depending on the context or the audience, especially for public figures over a long career.
And just briefly, you mentioned her TikTok. What's that like?
It seems like a mix. Professional stuff, opinions on cases or political figures, but also more personal glimpses, shoes, outfits. She even posts about someone or something called Peanut.
Peanut. Okay, well, social media gives you that more unfiltered look sometimes, I suppose.
Yeah, different facet beyond the official roles.
All right, let's shift focus now to the actual job she's stepping into. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia. The sources really emphasize this isn't just any U.S. attorney position.
Not at all. It's unique because it wears two hats. It acts as the local prosecutor for Washington, D.C. itself.
So handling everyday crime, misdemeanors, murders, everything in between.
Exactly. But also serves as the federal prosecutor for the district. So that covers everything from, say, child pornography and gang prosecutions to major financial fraud and terrorism cases.
Wow, that's an incredibly broad mandate, local and federal.
It is. And its location in D.C., the seat of the federal government, means it also handles a lot of civil litigation involving the government and cases with national significance.
So a huge amount of responsibility. The DOJ information stresses their commitment to fair and impartial justice, which you'd expect.
Of course. And it's widely seen as one of the most powerful and influential U.S. attorney's offices in the country, often mentioned in the same breath as the Southern District of New York, just given the profile of the cases.
And like other U.S. attorneys, the position is presidentially appointed, requires Senate confirmation for the permanent role. We know it has civil and criminal divisions.
That's the basic structure, yes.
So how does this double duty compare to, say, a U.S. attorney somewhere else, like that Western District of Texas example?
Well, the standard role for a U.S. attorney, and there are 93 districts, is to be the main federal prosecutor for that specific geographic area. They work under the Attorney General.
Prosecuting federal crimes, coordinating investigations with agencies like the FBI, DEA, etc., within their district boundaries.
Precisely. So someone like Margaret Leachman, the acting U.S. attorney in the Western District of Texas, her office focuses squarely on those federal matters within that part of Texas.
They wouldn't typically be handling local D.C.-style prosecutions like assault or burglary unless there was a specific federal angle.
Exactly right. That local prosecution piece is what makes the D.C. office fundamentally different and gives its U.S. attorney such a wide scope of authority and visibility right there in the Capitol.
Okay, that clarifies the uniqueness of the role. Now, this leads us into some of the points of interest, maybe even concerns, that the sources bring up around Pirro taking this specific job.
Yes, several threads emerge. One is simply the optics, or maybe the substance, of appointing a prominent former media personality, known for very strong opinions, to be a top prosecutor.
Right. The question of impartiality comes up immediately, doesn't it, given her history on television?
It does. And that ties into her well-documented support for President Trump and, as we mentioned, her active role in seeking her ex-husband's pardon. Those connections are definitely being scrutinized.
People are asking, can someone with those ties be perceived as and truly be impartial in overseeing cases, potentially including politically sensitive ones?
That's the core question being raised. Then there's the whole situation with Ed Martin's reassignment.
The predecessor.
Right. The mention of him now directing this weaponization working group. The sources suggest this group is aimed at investigating perceived overreach or bias in government, particularly referencing the previous administration.
So Pirro is stepping into an office that's now potentially linked to that kind of investigative focus within the DOJ.
It seems that way, adding another layer to the political context. And unsurprisingly, the media coverage reflects all this political tension.
How so? What are the different takes?
Well, you see outlets often described as left-leaning, really focusing on Pirro's partisanship, her past controversial statements, especially around the 2020 election. They raise alarms about politicization.
Okay. And on the other side?
Outlets seen as more right-leaning tend to emphasize her credentials as a former judge and prosecutor, her tough-on-crime reputation.
Downplaying the controversies made.
Often, yeah. Highlighting her legal background and Trump's praise, framing it as a strong law and order appointment.
So very different lenses viewing the same event, depending on the source.
Absolutely. It really highlights the polarized environment this is all happening in.
Okay, so let's try to pull this together then. Jeanine Pirro's appointment as interim U.S. Attorney for D.C., it's clearly a significant move.
No doubt. You've got her unique background law, yes, but also that very high-profile media career and her political history. And she's stepping into this incredibly unique and powerful prosecutor role.
That dual federal and local responsibility in the nation's capital really makes it a pressure cooker.
It does. It gives the office and whoever leads it immense influence and reach.
So maybe here's something for you, the listener, to mull over. When you think about this kind of critical role, U.S. Attorney for D.C., what's the right balance? How do you weigh deep legal experience against potential political influence or a strong public persona developed in media?
That's a great question. And specifically with Jeanine Pirro, which parts of her very varied background, the judge, the DA, the TV host, the political candidate, the Trump ally, which of those do you think will ultimately be most relevant or most impactful as she takes on this job?
It's definitely something worth thinking about.
And if you want to see how it unfolds, keep an eye on the news coverage surrounding her tenure and the work coming out of the U.S. Attorney's Office for D.C. That's where you'll likely see these dynamics play out in real time.